I do love me some Berserk. I was hooked ever since I saw the amazing 1997 anime adaptation, and naturally I went on to consume all the Berserk I can get my hands on. However, I never touched any of the Berserk games because I initially thought an English translation was unavailable and the games were probably just bad. Well, I was wrong about there not being an English translation, but is the game actually worth playing, or is it as bad as Berserk 2016? This game was released in 2004 in Japan and Korea, but unfortunately it never saw a North American release, so there was never an official English localization of this game. Thankfully, there are now ways to find and download patched versions of the game with an English translation, which isn't entirely necessary if you are familiar with the story, but it is nice to have the localization either way. In terms of story, this game is a close adaptation of the manga's fourth story arc known as the Falcon of the Millennium Empire arc, and it encompasses events between volumes 22 through 27 of the manga. For those of you who aren't manga nerds, this game basically has the same plot as the second season of the 2016 Berserk anime. The game itself is broken up into 6 chapters and it follows the Berserk story in a chronologically accurate manner. The one deviation from this though is a subplot which is unique to this game. It revolves around an apostle known as Charles who has reality bending powers. He creates illusory versions of the former Band of the Hawk members in order to mess with Guts' head. In all likelihood, this subplot was probably added as a means to justify inserting the deceased members of the Band of the Hawk and the events that transpired during the eclipse into this game. Right off the bat, the intro cutscenes hit hard, and the game already looks very promising. Compared to other games that came out for the PS2 in 2004, I would say this title looks formidable graphically. Running around with Guts and slicing up enemies is surprisingly fun for quite a while, and has got just the right amount of blood and gore. The other thing that surprised me about this title were the cutscenes and how well made they were. A lot of the cutscenes looked like they were taken straight out of the manga, and it's cool to revisit the Berserk chapters I read a long time ago in an animated format. The crazy thing too is how many of these cutscenes just look better than most of the 2016 anime. The game's soundtrack has a good variety of music which complements each level's distinct environments and features. The soundtrack also features music from the same composer who composed music for the 1997 anime. The intro song Sign is pretty awesome and is reminiscent of the fan favorite from the 97 anime, Forces. Another cool thing is that the voice actors in this game are also all from the cast of the 97 anime. Now the sound effects in the game are pretty clear and concise. My one complaint though is that Guts' sword sometimes sounds like a lightsaber for some reason. And I would have actually much preferred this instead. Now in terms of gameplay and controls, this game is something like a hack and slash RPG where you gain experience after defeating enemies. Kinda reminds me of Dynasty Warriors. The experience you gain can be used to level up Guts' attributes and weapons. The majority of the game is spent slicing, dicing, and blowing up tons of enemies, and I mean tons of enemies. The enemies that you encounter range from undead mercenaries to trolls and apostle bosses. So you can expect to fight anywhere between 500 to 1,000 enemies in each level, which does make sense since this is Berserk. It's a good thing that Guts has a hefty selection of weapons and special abilities at his disposal. His basic attack is a relatively quick succession of slashes with his Dragon Slayer. He also has a heavy slash attack which doubles as a charge-up attack which will perform a Zelda-like circular slash. There's also a dash which he could use to charge at enemies or avoid enemy attacks. And lastly, Guts can also block, but you'll probably never need to. In addition to these basic moves, Guts also has an entire arsenal of sub-weapons and special attacks. The sub-weapons include Guts' iconic arm cannon, repeating crossbow, throwing knives, and shrapnel bombs. The sub-weapons have unlimited ammo, but they all run on a cooldown timer. Guts' special abilities include a Berserk mode which will allow him to become partially invulnerable while his attack speed is increased. His other 4 special moves are kind of like combat assists performed by Guts' companions. Puck will heal Guts, Isidro will burn enemies nearby, Serpico will stop enemies for a few seconds, and Shirka will raise Guts' defenses. At first, the controls seem a little fickle and unresponsive in this game, but they do get better after a few minutes or so of practice. Overall, the gameplay sometimes feels purposely drawn out, maybe in order to create a longer play experience, since this game takes only about 8 to 12 hours to complete a full playthrough. All in all, the repetitive nature of the game can be attributed to the fact that it is a simplistic hack and slash title. However, its repetitive nature is still very much the low point of this game. I mean, you have to kill the illusionary versions of Judo, Corcus, and Pippin on 4 separate occasions. Haven't they suffered enough? Lastly, one of the highlights of the gameplay experience are its boss battles. Now, the boss battles aren't exactly challenging or require much strategy. However, I did play on the second easiest difficulty setting, so I'm not quite sure if that made a difference or not. Either way, the boss encounters are still quite interesting since you are facing some of the most prominent adversaries in the Berserk story. So how does this all stack up? The graphics and overall presentation in this game are above average and are comparable to some of the most acclaimed titles of 2004. And even though the graphics might look dated to most gamers these days, I personally love the cutscenes and wish there were more of them. So graphics and overall presentation gets an 8 out of 10. The music and sound effects were also very solid for this game. Like previously mentioned, the music went well with the environments and the sound effects were all crisp and clear. So I'd give this another 8 out of 10. Lastly, the gameplay experience and the controls. Controls can seem kind of off when first starting the game, but it really just takes some getting used to. The gameplay is fun enough, but it can get repetitive over time. The saving grace for the overall experience are the boss battles. So this gets a 7 out of 10. In total, that's an average score of about 7.7 out of 10. Berserk for the PS2 isn't necessarily a masterpiece or anything, but it does have enough good things in it to justify a playthrough. Especially if you're a fan of Berserk. The fact that you now also have an English translation for this game should be enough incentive for most to give this game a try. So yes, I do think that Berserk for the PS2 is worth playing in 2024. Thanks for watching. Check out my other videos.